dear team, I welcome you to our fourth annual meeting about the temperament and personality disorders. So the presence of each one of you means a lot for us. So we'd like to thank all the representatives of pharmaceutical companies who helped us organizing this meeting, as well as all our seniors, speakers, colleagues, and a special thank to our Jordanian guest, Professor Jeunes Al-Amjad, and our Egyptian guest, Professor Hanan Azam. A huge thank also to our dear friend Semiramis, who came from Switzerland. I kindly ask now Dr. Bruce, Dr. Azam, to start the first session. Wish you enjoy.
Welcome to all of you. I am so happy to stay with you this day. And I want to congratulate the Jeunes Association because they do this, and they do it in English language. Now let me introduce you. First speaker, Dr. Safin Jeunes, who is the founder of the Jeunes Psychiatric Association, and he will talk us about historical evolution of personality disorder concepts.
Thank you. So I'm very happy to be here with you today. GMC is something very important for me, and I'm happy to see this fourth annual meeting. So, Dr. Adrian taught me to speak about the historical evolution of personality disorders concepts. I will try to do it, not be easy, as I have to speak about 300 years in 30 minutes. I will try, so try to concentrate. So I think this subject is very interesting. You can see it. Why it is important? Because personality disorder is the primary psychiatric illness observed in most patients with psychosocial complaints, particularly young adults. Personality disorders is present in about 1/6 of people in the general population, half are all psychiatric outpatients, and 2/3 of patients with a history of psychiatric hospitalization or suicide attempt. Personality disorder has long been a controversial construct. One reason is that personality disorders are located on a fuzzy boundary between classical mental disorders and psychological problems that lie closer to normality. Psychiatry, which focuses on the severe of the pathological spectrum, has been slow to accept personality disorder diagnosis. Although the situation has gradually changed with the expansion of systematic research on personality disorders. This presentation is divided into three chronological time periods. The first, referred to as historical antecedents, encompasses theorists whose major works were propagated from ancient time through the 19th century. The second, termed 20th century formulations, represents the contributions of those whose key publications were prominent in the last century. And the third, noted as current and future prospects. So we begin with historical antecedents. Primitive humans and ancient civilizations alike viewed the unusual and the strange within a magical and mythological frame of reference. Behavior that could not be understood was thought to be controlled by animistic spirits. Although both good and evil spirits were conjectured, the bizarre and often frightening behavior of the mentally disordered led to prevailing belief that demon spirits must inhabit them. In India, Hindu medicine contributions in early India are associated with the name Susruta, who lived 100 years before Hippocrates. His works followed the traditional beliefs of his day regarding possible demoniacal possession, anticipating the significance of temperament or innate dispositions. Hindu medicine proposed that three such inclinations exist: wise and enlightened goodness, with its seat in the brain; impetuous passion, the source of the pleasure and pain qualities, with its seat in the chest; and blind crudity of ignorance, the basis of more animalistic instincts, with its seat located in the abdomen. Babylonian was the foundation of philosophical thought for most nations comprising the Mediterranean region. In fact, many of the traditions discussed among the Greeks and Romans can be traced to ideas generated initially in the Babylonian Empire. Babylonians were oriented toward astronomical events. Superstitions regarding the stars produced many gods, the result largely of their intellectual leaders' fertile imaginations. In Egypt, there is evidence that the heart was thought to be the center of mental activity. Egyptians also had difficulty in separating prevailing supernatural beliefs from that which could be observed and modified in nature. Also, astronomical phenomena were the primary object of worship. Natural qualities were usually turned aside in favor of the mystical powers of the gods. In China's first medical book asserted that the primary cause of psychiatric illness were to be found in vicious air, abnormal weather, and emotional stress. Prominent physician Zhang Zongjing, the Hippocrates of China, portrayed personality types based on a combination of natural elements, resulting in the fiery type, the earthy type, the golden type, and the watery type. Characteristics occurring inside man reflected phenomena occurring outside in nature. Soon thereafter, Chinese medicine shifted to become distinctly organ-centered. Thus, every visceral organ was believed to control specific behavioral function. In the earliest periods of Greek civilization, insanity was considered to be a divine punishment. Then there was Hippocrates, and you can see his profile. In Hippocrates, the inheritor of his father's traditions and the humoral concept of Pythagoras and Empedocles, Mental disorders progress from the magical and mythical realm to one of careful clinical observation and inductive theorizing. He synthesized the practical and sympathetic elements of the high school curve with the more biological proposals of Pythagoras, blending these elements to elevate mental process and disequilibrium into clinical science. Personality types were constructed by Hippocrates and his colleagues as abnormalities of temperament. Temperament was associated with the 5-4 humor model, which transformed earth, fire, water, and air into their parallel bodily elements. Individuals were characterized in terms of which one of the four elements predominated. Hippocrates identified four basic temperaments: the choleric, the melancholic, the sanguine, and the phlegmatic. This corresponded respectively to excess in yellow bile, black bile, blood, and phlegm. And you can see the four humors of Hippocratic medicine based on these characteristics. A prolific and sophisticated thinker, also in Greek civilization, called Theophrastus, wrote no less than 220 treatises on a variety of different topics. Although this diversity work was substantial, he became best known for a secondary aspect of his career, the writing of personality sketches called characters. Each of these portraits on faces one or another psychological trait, providing a vignette of various personality types: flatter, the gallows, the penurious, the tactless, the boors, and others. After the ancients speculated also that body structure was associated with the character of personality, whereas the humoral doctrine may be seen as the forerunner of contemporary psychiatric neurobiology, physiognomy and phrenology may be conceived as forerunners of modern psychiatric morphology. Physiognomy, first recorded in writing of Aristotle, sought to identify personality characteristics by outward appearance, particularly facial configuration and expressions. Despite its controversial, if not discredited side, phrenology, as practiced by Franz Joseph Gall in 1835, was an initially honest and serious attempt to construct the science of personology. Gall referred his studies of brain physiology as organology and cranioscopy. The rationale that Gall presented for measuring contour variation of the skull was not at all illogical, given the limited knowledge of 18th century anatomy. Gall asserted that just as it is logical to assume that persons with large biceps muscles are stronger than people with or small ones, so it would be logical to assume that persons possessing large cranial projections would display corresponding psychological characteristics to a greater extent than those who evidence smaller protuberances. Late 19th century French psychologist Theodore Guibou in 1890 attempted to formulate character type in a manner analogous to botanical classifications by varying the intensity level of two traits, loss of sensitivity and activity. Guibou sought to construct several major types among the personality proposed, were the humble character, noted by excess of sensibility and limited energy; the contemplative character, marked by keen sensibility and passive behavior; and the emotional type, combining extreme impressionability and an active disposition. Dutch psychologists Jeunes and Wiersma in 1906 and 1909 identified three fundamental criteria for evaluating character: activity level, emotionality, and susceptibility to external versus internal stimulation. In the United States, William McDowell proposed the consolidation of sentiments in his book, Introduction to Social Psychology, first published in 1988. McDowell labeled 8 tempers based on different combinations of three fundamental dimensions: the intensity, strength, and urgency, the persistency, inward versus outward expression, and the affectivity, emotional susceptibility of behavior impulse. Those of high intensity were viewed as active individuals. Those disposed to low intensity were seen as passive. High persistency directed the person to the external world, whereas those with low persistency were oriented toward internal methods. The second part of this presentation will be the 20th century formulation. The following chapter notes a number of contributions made by psychiatrists who broadened the primary focus on psychopathological diseases to include the morbid personality, that is, the deviant character types described by psychologists. So, the psychiatric typologies. Emile Kaplan was the prime psychiatric nosologist at the turn of the century. He did not systematize his thinking on personality disorder until 1913, in the 8th edition of his major text. Kaplan focused on a number of so-called morbid personalities, those whom he judged as standing for criminality and other disordered activities. Elsewhere, in 1990, he addressed 4 varieties of the cyclotimic disposition, which he identified as the hypomanic, the depressive, the irascible, and the emotionally unstable types. Kaplan also addressed an autistic temperament, which serves as the constitutional soil for the development of dementia precox. Formal classification of personality disorder did not begin to take shape until Kurt Schneider, a Dutch psychiatrist, described the group of what he termed rather confusingly in view of the subsequent use of the term psychopathic personalities in 1923. He did not view personality pathology to be a precursor to other mental disorders, but rather conceived it as a separate group of entities that covariate with them. The last edition of his text, Schneider described 10 variants often seen in psychiatric work. Among them, he identified a hyperthymic personality, a person who reflected a mix of high activity, optimism, and shallowness. He stated that they tend to be uncritical, nocturnal, impulsive, and independent, seemed unable to concentrate, achieving occasional insights, but failing to retain them as lasting impressions. Among other types, Schneider wrote about those in the second category, the depressive personalities. They have a skeptical view of life, tend to take things seriously, and display little capacity for enjoyment. They are often excessively critical and depreciatory of others. At the same time, they are full of self-reproach and exhibit hypochondriacal anxieties. Insecure personalities were grouped by Schneider in 2 subvarieties, the sensitive and the anarchists, compulsive. These individuals ruminate excessively over everyday experience, but have little capacity for expressing or discharging the feeling these thoughts still have. Also, in the 20th century formulation, Ernest Kretschmann categorized individuals in accord with their physical field and attempted to relate morphological differences to the major disorders of schizophrenia and many depressive psychosis. He proposed that people could be grouped into several basic group types: schizophrenic, schizoid, and schizotinic. were seen as possessing different quantities of the same disposition of temperament. Distinctly pathological level existing amongst schizophrenics, a moderate degree amongst schizoids, and in minimal amount among the relatively better adjusted schizotypics. Similarly, cycloids were viewed as moderately affected variants of those with manic depressive psychosis. Cyclotimic personalities were seen as normal types possessing minor portions of this disposition. So in the 20th century formulation, also psychoanalytic characterologies are very important to know. Psychoanalytic theorists have stressed the importance of early childhood experience. As they see it, it is these experiences that expose the individual to lifelong character styles and disorder of adaptation in what have been termed the psychogenetic hypothesis. Early events establish deeply ingrained defensive systems that may lead the individual to react to new situations as if they were replicates of what occurred in childhood. Sigmund Freud, Karl Abraham, Wilhelm Reich laid the foundation of the psychoanalytic character typology. Karen Hornes identified three broad modes of relating that will emerge when individuals are faced with the insecurities and inevitable frustrations of life. Moving toward people, moving against people, or moving away from them. In her 1945 book, Horney formulated three character styles to reflect each of these three solutions. Moving toward is found in compliant type, moving against in aggressive type, and moving away in the detached type. Few words regarding the ideas of Carl Gustav Jung are worth sharing. Most practitioners are acquainted with his distinction between extroversion and introversion. Few, however, are aware of their subdivisions and characteristics. Interacting with introversion and extroversion are four psychological modes of adaptation or functioning: thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition. Nowadays, the official diagnostic manuals classify personality disorders, and DSM-1 was the first official with ICD-1 6, the first official diagnostic and statistical manual on mental disorders. DSM-1 was published by the American Psychiatric Association in 1952. It was hoped that the first DSM clinically oriented framework may in the future facilitate systematic research of this nature. The original DSM devised to reduce confusing surrounding psychiatric diagnosis and diagnostic systems prevalent at that time, defined the personality disorders as patterns of behavior that were quite resistant to change, but not connected to a lot of anxiety or personality stress on part of the patient. This first DSM relied heavily on the psychoanalytic traditions and Freud's ideas, which were the prevailing view of that time period. DSM-2, published in 1968, reflected an attempt to make the American psychiatric classification system compatible with the international classification ICD-8, devised by the World Health Organization. It also reflected an attempt to adopt neutral language that did not endorse specific and controversial theoretical viewpoints, such as Freudian psychoanalytic theories. In DSM-2, personality disorders were described as follows. This group of disorders is characterized by deeply ingrained maladaptive patterns of behavior that are perceptibly different in quality from psychotic and neurotic symptoms. The development of the first two APA manuals provided American psychiatric with an orderly nomenclature. However, the DSM-2 offered little more than new names. The classification's concept remained ill-defined and overlapped. Diagnostic unreliability continued as a prominent criticism of psychiatric diagnosis. As Blashfield has noted, the first two DSMs met, to some degree, the socio-political need for a unified classification system that would be applicable in outpatients' clinical settings. Critics of the systems expressed concerns about the social impact of the diagnostic labels provided therein. The negative stigma associated with many psychiatric diagnoses was also used as a criticism against official diagnostic labels. As per Blashfield comments, a major goal of the newly appointed DSM-3 task force was to include as many clinically useful personality syndrome as could be justified. Despite objections from certain authors, a decision was made to incorporate categories that had not been fully validated by systematic research, but nevertheless had much to commend them in terms of their everyday clinical applicability. The third incarnation, DSM-3, published in 1980, at this time, the fields of psychology and psychiatry were struggling to establish themselves as scientific fields of study. This new version of the DSM reflected the fact that newer, more contemporary models of mental illness and treatment were emerging. It is important to understand that scientific study cannot proceed without a means for measuring what is being studied. In order for the scientific study of mental disorders to proceed, these disorders had to be defined in such a way as to make them observable and therefore measurable. Freud's concepts did not lend themselves to measurement. For instance, one cannot observe nor measure the idea. Therefore, the DSM removed these abstract Freudian concepts that could not be measured. They were replaced with observed behaviors and or reported thoughts, and these concepts were more easily measurable. The newer and more contemporary models of mental illness reflect significant paradigm shift within psychology and psychiatry during the 70s and 80s. This shift represented the declining influence of psychoanalysis and Freudian theories, and the ascendance of the cognitive behavior model within psychology, emphasizing the observable behavior manifestation of disorder, and the medical model within psychiatry, cataloging pathological symptoms and their biological causes. The goal of this entry was to outline the diagnostic criteria for as many conditions as possible and to rely on and to foster research on mental disorders. The biggest change was the introduction of a multi-action, multi-dimensional format for making diagnosis. The multi-action system placed personality disorder onto a separate axis called axis 2. This axis 2 was separated personality disorder from the rest of the major mental disorders and clinical syndromes such as major depression, bipolar disorders, schizophrenia. The goal of this separation of diagnostic dimensions was to enable clinicians to record a person's current state and prevailing difficulties on axis 1 while simultaneously describing a person's lifelong and pervasive personality characteristics on axis 2. In other words, axis 1 disorders were thought to be transient conditions, while personality disorders and other developmental conditions described on axis 2 were thought to be permanent conditions. The rationale was that it was necessary to describe these permanent conditions on a separate diagnostic dimension in order to highlight them so that they would not otherwise be overshadowed by the more acute axis 1 clinical symptoms. The multi-action system remained in place from 1980 until 2013. when it was adopted with the introduction of DSM-5 to numerous problems and controversies. The DSM, this new research resulted in the containment of the criteria sets of personality disorder diagnosis, and the DSM-3, DSM-4, DSM-40 are mainly the same classifications. Current and future prospects. What's new now? The two main classifications in psychiatry, DSM and ICD, have both attempt to acknowledge the need for a dimensional system and recognition of the potential for change in personality status, but have done this in very different ways. The most recent version of the diagnostic manual DSM-5 proposes an entirely different model of personality disorders for future research. Depending on the outcome of that research, we may someday assess personality disorders using a dimensional system of various personality traits. As a result of ongoing research, people with personality disorders are no longer seen as people with untreatable moral weakness or willful behavior. Personality disorders are now recognized as deeply troubling and legitimate conditions that have a large negative impact on people's lives and in most cases can be successfully treated. But there is a big division, even within its own ranks of experts, with one group arguing for clearly defined disorders, the so-called categorical system of classification, and another putting forward a dimensional classification based on trait-based personality theory, well established in psychology, in which the pathological effects show themselves increasingly as one moves toward the severity of the dimension, so that severe personality disorders seems to be manifest as multiple pathologies. So what's new in new section for future DSM-5? The hybrid model. There is an assessment of severity. By an assessment, first of all, there is an assessment of impairment in personality functions. Thereafter, it will be 6 categories and not 10: borderline, obsessive, compulsive, avoidant, schizotypal, antisocial, and narcissistic personalities. And there will be an assessment of 5 gross areas of pathological personality traits domain composed of 25 trait spaces: negativity, negative affectivity, detachment, antagonism, disinhibition, psychoticism. The model provided framework for assessment of self and interpersonal pathological effects, and a new instrument, the personality inventory of DSM-5, to operationalize the DSM-5 trait model in both self-report and informed versions. So this hybrid model enhances the severity of disorder, the best predictor of outcome, and the form or style of personality pathology. However, it seems to be very difficult now to put it in DSM-5 major section, and the American Psychiatric Association decided to place it in a separate section of the DSM-5 entitled Emerging Measures and Models in Section 3. The ICD-11 did it, we did it maybe in the ICD-11. They emphasizes also the severity of personality disturbance. They abolishes all type-specific categories of personality disorders. There is 3 steps. First of all, the diagnosis of personality disorders. The definition is merely the same. The second step is to identify the severity of personality disturbance. And after that, they identify the traits like the DSM-5. There is Four traits that merely are the same: negative, affective, disocial, disnegative, detached. The difference will be the anarchistic domain, but not the psychoticism domain like in DSM-5. The domain traits are not inherently pathological, but rather represent profile for underlying personality structure. So, what we can conclude that personality disorder has largely been hidden in the past in the undergrowth of practice. The term personality disorder has often been used in a pejorative sense as a diagnosis of exclusion, label applied to people who were regarded as difficult to help and probably untreatable. Attention now to personality disorder facts have therefore oscillated between attempts to dismiss it altogether as a non-diagnosis or instead to regard it as a specialist subject in psychiatry that could be parted outside the scope of mental illnesses. So the message is that personality disorders is not deemed to be an esoteric specialty, walled off from the rest of medicine, but should be updated by all researchers and embraced by all clinicians. Thank you.
The presentation now is for Professor Dean Lottie. She will talk about culture and personality.
I'm very pleased to be with you for the fourth annual meeting. I'm not a young psychiatrist, but young psychiatrists are attached to me, so I'm very pleased to be here with you. I'm going to speak about not personality disorders, but personality in general. So we are getting out of disorders. I'm speaking about culture and personality. And just take this photo in mind. I will explain it. And I will explain why I will change the title, different as mentioned. The committee asked me to speak about influence of culture on personality traits. Affect. The historical link between personality and culture I'm not going to go to historical roots like Safwan did it. I'm just going to start in the 18th century with philosophers like Hume in England, Montesquieu in France, Kant in Germany, that dealt with the question of the national character. Popular wisdom about comparative national characters was codified as in an anonymous Austrian painting. You see that in this painting, the artist tabulates 10 European nations according to each of a multitude of qualifiers such as dress, religion, pastimes, etc. So the artist has not hidden his sympathies and antipathies. Is this okay? Much better. Thank you. Is this an affair of stereotypes, or is it truly a national character? Stereotypes are stereotypes. That is, that they are always a way to generalize patterns and repeated behavior, usually different and negative behavior to ourselves. There are a multitude of culturally based stereotypes. Swiss are factual, Tunisian are not very factual, Germans are task-oriented, they also take much beer, Americans, etc., etc. So, Sacha Guitry told us, méfiez-vous de la première impression. Don't get these stereotypes for evidence. Why? A Korean manager visiting Sweden assumes that all women seated behind desks are secretaries. But such behavior would be inappropriate and possibly dysfunctional in Sweden, where many women hold management positions. So what about this national character? An anthropological definition of national character
was relatively enduring personality characteristics and patterns that are modeled among the adult members of the society. After the 16th, personality psychologists moved away from the topic of this national character, and a quantitative approach in the cultural psychology was, however, continued in the field of cross-cultural psychology. So we can speak about culture and psychology as we usually, as psychiatrists, deal about psychopathology and culture. You have already you have already made the link between psychopathology and culture. So culture and psychopathology are inseparable in the first point of view, and this perspective is called cultural relativism. And in the second point of view, basic psychological disorders are present in all cultures, and there is a universality argument. So culture, however, plays a role in determining the exact behavior and the contextual manifestation of disorders. It's the same thing for cultural bound syndromes, about AMAC, about anorexia nervosa, which would be an Occidental syndrome that is getting widespread all over the world, the ZAR, etc. So culturally bound personalities, can we say this term is are personalities culturally bound, or are there only basic transcultural personality? And this is the central question I'm trying to deal with in my presentation. Let's before tell what is culture. Culture is to society what memory is to individuals. Culture is a shared system of meaning that provides the standards of perceiving, believing, evaluating, communicating, and acting among those who are a language, who share a language, a historic period, and a geographic location. So it would be a useful metaphor of culture is like the game's rules. Personality is an individual's characteristic pattern of thought, emotion, and behavior, together with the psychological mechanisms hidden or not behind those patterns. It may also be conceptualized as a configuration of cognitions, emotions, and habits activated when situations stimulate their expression. Differences between personality, traits, and identity. We've seen personality. Trait would be a characteristic of an individual describing habitual ways of behaving, thinking, and feeling, and he will have many traits. Identity would be the perceived roles in his life, and it would be more culturally bound. So in some, I don't know why colors have changed. Personality in the middle is a mix of what is heredity, physical characters, gender, and traits, you see it, and on the right, environment with social factors, situational factors, and cultural factors. That's cultural factors, we will see it at the end of the presentation, are not only undermined, but characteristic sampling of the information in the environment, which corresponds to the sampling that occurs in different cultures, can be one of the bases of individual differences in personality. So there will be three perspectives studying this topic: the national character, we saw it; cross-cultural psychology that focuses on traits, views personality as something disparate and separate from culture; and culture-specific or indigenous personalities, that constellations of personality traits and characteristics would be found only in specific cultures. So I'm trying to summarize these two papers of Buhari, Cultural Influences on Personality, and Julie Alik, Personality Dimensions Across Cultures. So you see the 2 points of view. Measuring personality across culture can be done by psychodynamic approaches, Freud, Jung, etc., humanistic approaches, Maslow, Rogers, etc., or a contemporary personality psychology, where a cognitive and social measurement that is dominated by the trait approach, in which individuals' differences in enduring dispositions are assessed. This third assessment can be ethic or emic, and these two terms must be defined. Ethic perspectives assumes personality can be measured and compared across cultures, universally. Emic perspectives suggest that it is difficult to create measures of personality that have the same meaning and validity across cultures. So it's indigenous, it's located. Anyway, cross-cultural validation of personality measures require psychometric evidence from all cultures. So the first module is cross-cultural research on traits, and I'm going to speak about the five-factor model, or dimensions of personality. The crucial event in the revival of trait psychology was the emergence of this five-factor model, replicated by many researchers. Although many instruments have now been developed to measure the five-factor model, the NEO-PIR, Neo Personality Inventory Device, is the most widely used in research. And the factors have been given several names, somewhat interpretations by different investigators, but the most known are the NEO-PIR names. They are called neuroticism, anxious and worryism, extraversion, outgoing, being social, openness, being creative, being daring, agreeableness, being selfless, being forgiving, and conscientiousness. I cannot repeat it, being reliable, being hardworking. Each one of the five traits is divided in 6 substrates, and there are many tools to assess the same 30 traits. The research program of Macri and Costa results are that basic personality traits, these 5, are transcultural. The same personality structure has emerged in a wide variety of culture, and traits show the same pattern of developmental change in lifetime between adolescence and adulthood, and it seems to be stable pattern in adulthood in all cultures. And the traits are biologically based. So, McRae argued that there are basic tendencies, these 5, that are independent of culture and biologically based. So a new point of view would be that from this perspective, the study of personality and culture is no longer a matter of documenting how culture shapes personality. Instead, it asks how personality traits and culture interact to shape the behavior of individuals and social groups. This study in the north, neuroticism, and in the east, extraversion of the different countries. And all countries are in this constellation. So you see, it's valid in every country, in the cultures, but there are some differences. And some countries are even not on the figure. So we can make criticism to this 5 model. The assessment of personality across cultures is difficult because there are many ways in which non-equivalence of factors may emerge. Some authors argue that this big 5 is incomplete, and there will be a big set, example, religiosity that is missing. Some argue for only 3 factors. So, and other authors have mentioned that this model is not valid in other countries, like in China. So they asked, when is a difference in factors touches a real difference? And the second part would be a shift of transcultural to cultural aspects of personality to indigenous personalities and a cultural perspective on identities. Identities is that part of the personality that is more linked to culture. There are in each culture specific ways of understanding the world. I'm not expert on personalities, but I have seen when preparing this conference that African and Arab studies are very lacking. So we are not putting the accent on our specific cultural personality. If we compare USA and Japan, they are not. They seem to be belonging to two different worlds. For historical background in the USA, I think, therefore I am. For Japanese, for English USA, they emphasize the I do, I am, I. In Japan, there is even no words to tell the word I. It's the self. And the major proverb in Japan is a nail that stands out if it's a nail that stands out is hammered down. So you see the two perspectives that are very different. So are their personalities transcultural? Are they not local personalities? So how can we integrate universal and culture-specific understanding of personality? Integrating universal and culture-specific understanding of personality uh, would be facilitated when we look to the two different aspects of personality that are traits that are rooted in biology, and Dr. Gabe is going to speak about temperament, and this would be the basic common transcultural aspect of personality, and the entities that are less influenced by biology and more influenced by culture. So the personality, the sources of personality are the existence of biological, innate, and evolutionary adaptive factors that create genetic predispositions to certain types of personality traits, and culture constant learning principles and processes. Genetics of these different BDNF, COMT, etc., are contributing to personality traits. And don't forget epigenetics. And in epigenetics, there are culturally bound arguments. So culture has, in epigenetics, a biological consequence. Temperaments, we will see it with Dr. Gabe, so I'm not going to go through this aspect, just to say that genetic predisposition has been mentioned in very studies, and the measures of the big five personality dimensions, differences in the population are 40 to 50% genetically determined. But genetic predisposition is not genetic inevitability. Because there's always environmental influences and others. Power of parents, the power of peers, the power of circumstances, and the power of culture. So the personality would be an interaction between the temperament, culture, and the situation. And according to Church, traits exist in all cultures, but account for behavior less in collectivistic than in individualistic cultures. Situation determinants of behavior are important universally, but more so in collectivistic than in individualist cultures. And cognitive consistency between psychological processes and behavior occurs universally, but is less important in collectivist than in individualist cultures. So how is culture transmitted? It would be transmitted through language and the modeling of behavior when conditions permit humans to communicate through a shared language, living in the same historic period, and when they are sufficiently proximal to influence each other. I have done a very long paragraph about ecology to culture, but I see that I don't have much more time. So So I'm not going to speak about ecology to culture links because I'm going straight to dimensions of culture, like we saw dimensions of personality. Dimensions of culture, it would be a centenity, a concept parallel to the personality of individuals. What would be these dimensions? Complexity, authors say that cultures with high income, with high urban settings would be more complex. I don't totally agree. Tightness and looseness of culture, collectivism, and individualism. Collectivism is the extent to which the self is defined as a bound and separate. And vertical or horizontal relationships emphasize on hierarchy and status versus equality. So this would be an independent self in individualist culture, and this would be an interdependent self in collectivist culture. So many cultures can be studied on this model, and we can compare individualism and collectivism for many traits. And the most important paper in this optic is Dimensions of Culture in the IBM study of Hofstede. He noted that dimensions of personality are widespread, dimensions of culture are widespread, and in this study, four dimensions are power distance, uncertainty, avoidance, individualism, and masculinity. Also, you can study different cultures owing to these dimensions. And just I want to say you that this level is the level of cultures, but there's a parallel with the level of personality in individuals. So individualism and collectivism are used at the cultural level, whereas the individual level of analysis, the corresponding terms are idiocentrism and allocentrism. And we can study the relating dimensions of culture to personality factors. How do they relate? I wrote this article of personality and culture revisiting linking traits and dimensions of culture. We want to relate something in the cultural level to something in the individual level. So how, if at all, or are they to be related? One possibility is to attempt to measure the culture dimensions in individuals, and the other alternative is to measure personality traits at the cultural level. So this has been done, and the distribution of personality traits in the citizens of different culture has been studied. And from this perspective, traits form part of the ecology to which cultures adapt. So my presentation will have as title influence of individual traits on culture, and thus culture would be a trait-related construct. So the five-factor model of personality and the IBM study dimensions of culture represent the broadest summaries currently available of individual and cultural differences, and correlations between these two give a useful overview of how personality relates to culture. McRae's interpretation is that personality's consequences are for value systems, so personality traits affect value systems. On the other hand, Hofstede's interpretation is that culture gives consequences for traits, and he has done this correlation between the cultural dimensions and the personality dimensions. And for him, the percentage of variance in the country scores for the personality factors that can be explained by the cultural dimensions range from 55% for the neuroticism to 24% for consciousness, and it degrees in order between the N and the C. So, who's going to win? First point of view or the second? In fact, the first does not claim that trait levels are completely determined by cultural influences, and the second does not suppose that cultural values are merely a reflection of personality. So values and perhaps traits are also influenced by sociological processes and have been shaped over millennia by identity pressures, and evolutionary psychologists have begun to address these distant causes of individual and cultural differences. So new and old questions are rising. Are there innate temperamental differences between ethnic populations that give rise to cultural differences? The idea of an innate difference in psychological characteristics among groups is not good for many social scientists because it has historically been used as a basis for lessons. But however, a legitimate scientific neutral hypothesis can be done. Cultural level traits can be legitimately operationalized as the mean of individual trait levels, so personality can be related to almost any features of culture. One could ask, for example, if patriarchal or matriarchal cultures have different personality profiles, or if traits are associated with different styles of art or folklore, etc. Finally, an important direction would be the study of culture changes and its impacts on personality. For instance, as globalization increasingly pushes different cultures to interact with each other, what kinds of culturally hybrid personalities will emerge? And what's the impact of the Jasmine Revolution on Tunisian states with this big and fast change in culture? So in conclusion, every person is in certain respects like all other peoples, like some other persons, and in some respects like no other persons. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for our two speakers, Dr. Safwan Kneshi and Dr. Lima Atrafi, for their excellent communication. And I am sure that there will be a lot of questions at the end of this section. We immediately pass it to Dr. Kisra Said with the communication about influence, what's the difference between temperament and personality. Good morning. So I am very happy to be here with you this morning, and it's a pleasure for me to give this presentation about what's the difference between temperament and personality. So in our practice, I became with Albert Camus, and he said, we continue to shape our personality on our life. If we know ourselves perfectly, we should die. In our practice, usually we say that temperament is the same thing that character, that personality. Is it true? Is it false? We will see what's the similitude, what's the difference. First of all, we will say the factors impact the development of personalities. Biological factors impacting personality development, psychological factors impacting personality development. First of all, we will begin with temperament, after that attachment, after that life experiences, and characters. What's personality? In the introduction of psychology,
redefining personality, but about personality can be defined as the distinctive and characters patterns of thoughts, emotion, and behavior that make up an individual's personal style of interacting with the physical and social environment. And we will see the definition of personality through the presentation. What's temperament? We will see the definition and the evolution of the concept. With Dr. Safwan, we have seen how the definition and the concept of temperament we began with Hippocrates and Galen in the Greek medicine. Of course, the temperament of each person will be the result of the balance between the four humors that constitute it: the low bile, black bile, frank, and blood. These four qualities were related to the four basic substances existing in the world: fire, air, water, and earth. And that we have four temperaments, as you know. So we have sanguine temperament, we have a person that is pleasure sociable, phlegmatic who is related and quiet, melancholic who is thoughtful, and choleric who is not audacious. The Greeks assumed that the imbalance between those qualities created an invisible inner state, but that would be responsible for the variation in relation, things, emotions, and behaviors. After that, we will see the evolution of the personality and how temperament was stated in the personality disorder. I will not define this because Dr. Safwan said this with Evelyn Krippling, Schneider, Christmer, and Eisner. I just will say the Eisner personality dimension because we will see the relationship between the two personality dimensions identified by factor analysis and the four basic temperaments defined by Hippocrates and Galen. And here we see in the figure how melancholic, choleric, and phlegmatic and sanguine temperaments are related, or the links between the traits said by Einstein. So we can say how, for example, the sanguine temperament can be sociable or talkative with the traits of extroverted personality. In the last years, with Hagop Akiskai, we can talk about the 5 temperaments or the affective temperaments, which are hyperthymic, depressive, cyclothymic, irritable, and the last one, anxious temperament. The last one is the most recent and the most controversial. For Akiskai, is it a continuum for bipolar disorder? Is it a subsyndrome for the bipolar disorder? Is it temperament that this temperament this temperament we can treat this temperament or no? Just now, we are discussing this question, and Akiskal discussed just now these 3 questions. So, temperament is the most primitive component of the personality. The definition implies that temperament is present at birth and expressed very early in life. Temperament refers to early appearing vibration in emotional reactivity. Usually talking about reactivity, Rothbard and Delivery say that constitutionally based individual differentiations in reactivity and self-regulation, and related physiology that is preferentially linked to an envelope of behaviors and emotions. Here I would talk about an energizer cited by David Ritchie that he compared temperament to the main key of the piece of music, that's the symphony of a person's life. This key, whether A major or A minor, does not restrict the endless possibilities that can arise in the symphony, but it's always there, influencing the tone of the music throughout the piece. The key of composition is detectable to the discerning ear and intuitively perceived by nearly everyone. From time to time, it may change, but eventually it gains her. So it's temperament. Now I will present a study done by Chas, Thomas, and colleagues, pioneers on human temperament with the New York longitudinal study. This study began early in 1950s. So the aim of this study focused on how temperament qualities influences adjustment throughout life. It was done in young infants were related in 9 temperament characters. So here, as you said, these 9 basic dimensions were rated in continuum, and we have 9 temperaments that were rated in continuum. So these 9 temperaments were the level of motor activity, the rhythmicity, the approach of the withdrawal as initial reaction, the adaptability, the withdrawal of responsiveness and sensory sensitivity, the intensity of emotional reaction, the quality of mood, distractibility, persistence of attention span. And we found 65% of children that fit into of those patterns. 40% of these easy patterns were easy. 20% of difficult patterns, and 50% the slow to warm up patterns was, so we have 30% was easy, 40% were easy, 50% was slow to warm up, and 10% were difficult. What's the characteristics for this temperament? Let's see. So for the easy children, they have a positive mood. They were readily adapted to the new experiences. They have also regular sleeping and eating. For the children who have slow to warm up, they have low level for motivation. They have variable mood. For difficult baby, they have poorly adapted to new experiences. They were negative and very fussy, and they have irregularity and rhythmicity. And the most important result is that after 27 years, that means in 1977, the researcher found that these broad patterns of temperament qualities were remarkably stable. That means they no change. More recent research of child temperament and personality was investigated the correlation between early temperament, characteristic, and later psychology. Some researchers have demonstrated that certain dimensions, such as low effortful control of persistence, may reflect a general vulnerability to many behavioral disorders. The relationship between temperament and psychology are mediated and modulated through a number of other factors, including attachment, cognitive styles, and environmental selection. So, if we conclude, the essential requirement that we can say of the temperament tree includes appears early in life, That's the role of biology, the genetic influence, relative stability across time, and with the new definition is very important because it affects the ability of variability to be explored, especially the emotional reactivity, the self-regulation envelope of behaviors emotionality, the intensity, energy, attention, behavior, sociability. So temperament is our endogenous reactivity to the environment. What about personality traits? Closely related to the concept of temperament is that the personality traits. And here I will recall what was said by Dr. Rafafi, the 5-factor models done by Costa and Macri, which are the big 5. So the FFM consists in the 5 broad domains of general personality function. So the openness of experience, the consciousness, the extraversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And here we have a continuum between the low and the high of the 5 domains, or 5 dimensions of these big 5. So if we have a low in openness to experience, we have someone who have rigid adherence to routine, consistency. If we have a high openness, we will have someone who is curious, enjoys, and in the 2 parts of this dimension, we can have a maladaptive personality, so we can have personality disorders. And throughout the presentation, we can see this. For consciousness, in the low dimension, we have disinhibition, personality. In the high, we have person who is organized, efficient. For the extraversions, if we have low dimension, so a person who is detached, the opposite, he is energetic. For agreeableness, we have low, if it's low, so it's a person who is antagonism, cold. The opposite, who is friendly with a good team player. For neuroticism, who is person sensitive, nervous. If it's low, the opposite, who is emotional stability. With their nuclear, who each based on their research using the WBR, Costa and Magria used this assessment, and here with the nuclear we see how the personality traits are closely linked with the temperament. And we can understand why personality experts no longer distinguish between temperament and personality. And personality experts propose dimensions considering the basic emotional characteristics and other related to sociability, vitality, balance, control, flexibility, and openness. I propose this book written by Dr. Ili Hantouche, The Tempérament Affectif. It was the new edition in 2014. It's a good book. I recommend it, and he explained why the personality experts no longer distinguish between temperament and personality. Now we say that others new research and meta-analysis of previous studies have suggested that a slight maturation effect for all 5 states. That means there is changes at adulthood in the dimensions on consciousness, agreeableness, and openness, extraversion, neurotiness that decreases, and the other are increases at age. take it at all proposes that personality traits may change more than is represented by some vegetable data. This means that temperament is stable over time, whereas personality may be less stable. Genetics factors have been studied to determine the impact of heredity on personality functions, and personality researchers conducted on twin subjects has suggested that both hereditability and environmental factors contribute to FFM personality traits and equally influences of all factors broadly and about the same extent. And it's another difference between temperament and personality. What about psychosocial factors affecting personality development? We can talk about attachment. Lorenzny defined attachment theory as a biopsychosocial model referring to a person characteristic while a relation is in close relationship, such as with parents, children, and romantic patterns. An adult who is superly attached has internalized a reliable relationship in his or her caregiver in infancy, and he can maintain an adequate equilibrium between self-regulation and interpersonal regulation for stress. So, attachment can give stress tolerance, regulation of emotion, attentional control, mentalization of and an infantile sense of self-agency, that his or her action can make a difference. So, attachment styles have been found to remain relatively stable during life and show minimal gender differences or variation with language and culture. And we return to culture. It's estimated that there is 68 to 75% with the correspondence between attachment classification in infancy and in childhood. What about life experiences? We say that continuum with attachment and Winnicott's notion of good enough matters incorporates the micro interactions between the mother and the child as central to the development of a child's sense of security. A young child who is developing a healthy personality gains the capacity for mental processing and mentalizations. The collaborative longitudinal personality disorder study suggested a link between the number of time of childhood trauma and the development of personality disorder. Retrospective studies have suggested that rates of childhood trauma among individuals with personality disorders are higher. And we finished with characters. Cognitive schema are developed to recognize that vast amounts of information imparted upon the child. These are the factors that begin to define their sense of self. Characters require higher cognitive functions such as reasoning, abstraction, and sample interpretation. These functions have their origins in early childhood and are developed through adolescence and beyond. Characters consist in our goals and values. In this way, characters may be true of us intentional and rational. Bollinger has made the temperament and character inventory. It's a very important assessment that evaluates the overall of personality. Here we can see four dimensions that evaluate temperament, novelty seeking, which very dependent of dopamine, that exploring activity responds to novelty, harm avoidance, which very linked to serotonin. It represents the worry in anticipating of problem. The reward depends which depending in noradrenaline, which very represented the dependence of approval of others, the persistence which represented the understanding of behavior despite obstacles. Character is represented by three dimensions, which are responsibility, goal-oriented and self-confidence, cooperativeness, which represents by tolerance, cooperativeness and empathy, self-transcendence, which is the view of self in relation to the universe and all. So, as you see, personality is not represented just by the dimension of temperament, but it includes also character. If temperament provides the biogenetic predisposition, character is through to provide the adaptive interface to negotiate our internal needs with the external environmental pressure. Character modulates the internal need for perfection and shaping with the pursuit of getting the job done. In conclusion, as we say, personality is the sum of temperament and character. Genetic temperament predisposition, the quality of attachment, relationships, and life events interactive in a complex manner to assist in healthy optimate personality development or to contribute to maladaptive functionally disordering personality disorder. And thank you.
Presentation for now is presented by Ilhan Shari. Its topic is what makes us who we are, an overview of personality traits.
Thank you, Dr. Hassan. Dear friends, dear colleagues, first I would like to thank you for the opportunity to present this work. I am Ina Shari, I'm first year psychiatry resident in Hassan Hospital, and today I'm going to expose this overview of personality theories, not a word, but with successful outcomes. So, according to the American psychologist specializing in personality theory, Walter Mischel, the personality is the individual's distinctive and enduring characteristics, including stated patterns of thoughts, feelings, emotions, and behavioral tendencies. So, it's absolutely one. So, it's absolutely. So it's absolutely one of the most So it's absolutely one of the most compelling questions in psychiatry. It's been always difficult to define and understand what personality is, which is crucial for understanding the complex relationship between personality and psychopathology. So the purpose of this work is to show the main approaches to personality that have been advanced simply because none of them provided a thorough explanation of what makes a personality. But what's interesting is that different approaches try to answer different questions and that with different aspects. So these different approaches wanted to offer a comprehensive unitary view of personality. but they were competitive and even went to the exclusion of alternative theories. Theories going from genes to cells to brain structure to human behavior, so we can see the main approaches: psychodynamic, behavioral, and social cognitive approaches, humanistic approaches, trade and biological approaches. It all started with Hippocrates, who was the Middle Ages, who presented the first known personality model, which characterized the human behavior in terms of four components, each associated with different bodily fluids or human. Blood was optimistic, flag was slow and lethargic, black white was sad and depressed, and yellow white was angry. The first approach is the psychodynamic approach, founded by the Austrian neurologist Sigmund Freud, who introduced the theory of the unconscious, which is a vast reservoir of often inacceptable and hard to tolerate thoughts, feelings, desires, and memories. So Freud proposed an anatomy of the mind consisting of three components of the human mind, which is the head, the superego, and the ego. The unconscious part of the mind that is the source of the animal instincts is the head. It is based on the pleasure principle, is the source of animal instincts, and it seeks the immediate gratification. The superego is the unconscious part of the mind that has internalized moral standards and that is softening and restraining thoughts and actions of the ego. The ego is the conscious part of the mind that controls thought and behavior and is most concerned with external reality. It's kind of making peace between ego and superego. So Freud used the analogy of the iceberg to describe the three levels of the mind. So as you can see, we find the three components as we travel upwards from the unconscious to the preconscious and ending in the conscious level of the mind. So there is a constant struggle for balance, which is always called dynamic consciousness. The ideal goal is the establishment of an intra-psychic harmony, otherwise neurosis results. In fact, this conflict resides mainly between the head and the superego, and as they are against each other, defense mechanisms will work, which are the ego's unconscious protection measures of reducing anxiety. First defines the theory of personality development that's centered on the effects of the sexual pleasure drive on the individual's self. So for him, the sexual libido is the only mover of the person. On the other hand, other psychodynamic theories tend to emphasize on the role of the conscious mind and the non-sexual motivations, such as neo-Freudians, beginning with the Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung, who collaborated with Freud, found that sexual drive is not part of the equation, and he also introduced the notion of collective unconscious. In fact, according to Jung, like Freud, the human psyche is composed of three parts, which are the consciousness, the personal unconscious, and the collective unconscious. The collective unconscious is a shared inherited reservoir of memory traces from our species as a human. We also define the individuation process, which is the process of confronting the unconscious, which is the path of self-knowledge. The author psychotherapist Alfred Adler developed a different understanding how the mind works. His approach is called the individual psychology. So unlike Freud, who divided the human mind into components, Adler had a humanistic view of the human being as seen as a whole. And what great force underlies our motivation as individuals is striving for perfection. So the ideal goal here is the expansion of the individual and enhancement of social interest. Another view on personality is presented by the behavioral and social cognitive approaches. The human behavior is learned. So thus all behavior can be learned and new behaviors can learn in its place. So behaviorists assume that the only things that are real are the things that we can see and observe. The Russian physiologist Ivan Pavlov, known primarily for his work on classical conditioning, assumed that all behavior was reflexive. And at a more abstract level, Pavlov thought that all learning, whether of elicited response in animals like the dog model or of the high conceptual behaviors in humans, was due to mechanisms of classical conditioning. The American psychologist
psychologist who established the psychological school of behaviorism, John Watson, said that the mind has no place in psychology. In fact, this is an objective phenomenon, and the real explanation of behavior resides in the central nervous system. So P.F. Skinner, the American psychologist, affirmed that we can shape the behavior in desired directions, and he insisted on the effect of the real forces. So unlike earlier behaviorism that had been concerned with stimulus-response connections, Skinner looked at the learning process in the opposite way, investigating how learning was affected by stimuli and presented after an act was performed. So after that, the transition was happened between behaviorism and social cognitive psychology, which emerged in the 1960s and the 1970s. The key points here are that people learn by observing others, and these learned behaviors can be central to one's personality, and each behavior witnessed can change a person's way of thinking and cognition. The core concept of this theory can be explained by the Canadian psychologist Bandura, who has a scheme that explains the geometric reciprocal relationship between cognitive factors, environmental factors, and behavioral factors. So the next approach is the humanistic one, always also called theories, construct theories, and phenomenological theories. So if the personality is not passively molded by internal motivational or external situational, it's more about self-knowledge and self-awareness. In other words, people are considered capable of knowing themselves and being their own best experts. Beginning with the American psychologist and father of humanistic psychology, Abraham Maslow, who said that people are naturally good and they want to grow and be the best they can be. But first, various needs have to be fulfilled. So, in order to explain what these needs are, Maslow came up with a hierarchy of needs. And it goes from the basic needs down to reaching the goal or self-actualization. The American psychologist and one of the founders of the humanistic approach to psychology, who is Scott Rogers, who presented the person-centered perspective, said that we are basically good as long as we are nurtured in a growth and promoting environment. So this ideal environment is composed of genuineness and conditional positive regard and empathic understanding. The fifth approach is the trait and the biological approach. The essence of this approach is the assumption that behavior is primarily determined by a number of stable generalized personality factors or traits, and these traits are inferred from questionnaires and routines. And many researchers, as been said, focus on 5 large factors or dimensions of personality that have emerged from statistical analysis of traits. So this is the habitual patterns of behavior, thoughts, emotions. They are relatively stable. This is the 5-factor personality traits model, which are the agreeableness, the extroversion, openness, the conscientiousness, and neuroticism. Another view on biological approach is presented by Hans Ising, which is connecting physiological disposition to the biological foundation. Another view is the genetic roots of personality, which emphasizes the role of inheritance in personality using the famous method, which is comparing the degree of similarity on trait measures obtained for genetically identical twins as opposed to twins that are fraternal. So the most famous research was done by Robert Blumen, the American psychologist, that said that it's unquestionable that one's genetics legacy has an extensive influence on personality. However, the same findings find that there is an importance of the experience and the environment. So to conclude, personality psychology may be evolving into a more unified field toward a cumulative science of personality. However, why choosing to adopt a theory and not make the other way around? Starting without theory, describing the human behavior and trying to categorize it, then introduction to understand and define personality. What is the diagnostic and statistical manual of mental disorder as an atheoretical mythology and purely descriptive approach deals with alternatives, the subject will remain the subject of debate. And thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shafjani, for this presentation. And now we go to the next presentation, which will be presented by Dr. Rania Zausch, and who will speak about the extent of the personality disorder.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. I am really happy today to be here with you and to speak about the extinct personality disorders. So, as an introduction, I would say that the proposed revisions of the DSM have spurred debate over what illnesses can be included in the essential handbook of psychiatry. Everything from gender identity disorders to childhood mood swings has come under fire. And it's not the first time. Actually, the history of psychiatry is littered with impassionate fights over controversial diagnoses. And actually, personality disorders are no exception to this rule. So, just a quick reminder of the 10 existing personality disorders. I know that all of you know them. So, there are in 3 categories, cluster A, B, and C. So, cluster A is about odd or eccentric personalities. There are the paranoid, the schizoid, and schizotypal personality. The cluster B is about the dramatic personalities, antisocial, borderline, histrionic, and narcissistic. And then cluster C is about anxious personalities, avoidant, dependent, and obsessive compulsive. This is a table summing up the evolution of personality disorders in each edition of the DSM from the first to the fifth, the last one. And we can see that some of the personalities have been stable over all the editions, whereas other ones have appeared in some editions and that were removed. And we will be talking about that once. I couldn't deal with all of them because I will be short of time. But we will deal with passive-aggressive, the sadistic, and the codependent personality disorder. And the question that I will try to answer to is, why did they throw them away? So the passive-aggressive personality disorder, so it was described for the first time in the US Army among the soldiers in the Second World War. And the military psychiatrist described soldiers who did not comply with superior's commands with that term, passive-aggressive. And actually, it is the indirect expression of hostility through procrastination, stubbornness, sullen behavior, and deliberate or repeated failure to accomplish requested tasks for which one is often explicitly responsible. So, the passive-aggressive behavior can include, for example, laziness, forgetting appointments, commitments, fear of trusting others, complaining all the time, and externalizing feeling non-verbally. For example, a person who is angry would slam a door or throw an object instead of expressing his anger verbally. And then he will deny the feelings that this attitude legitimately raise. They are also manipulating people, and they have tendency to lie very often and to be dishonest in general. So the qualification of these behaviors as personality disorder, however, is very controversial. And the designation was removed from the DSM in its 4th edition, and it was brought to its appendix. So why? Because many authors do not consider the passive-aggressive behavior like a whole disease, but just a symptom that can be found in various disorders such as psychopathy, psychosis, or even in other personality disorders. And it is often the sign of behavioral immaturity. So another controversy that apparently contributed to the removal of this personality disorder from the DSM is diagnostic content. So although the list of characteristics signifying passive-aggressive behavior is substantial, Milan in 1981 viewed passive-aggressive as a single symptom diagnostically included in a larger syndromal context that he labeled negativistic. So what is negativistic personality disorder? It includes characteristics that have been added to a passive-aggressive behavior, such as irritability, anger, pessimism, or discontent. So in the end, the authors of DCF4 included Milan, added characteristics reflecting a wider dimension of his disorder, and removed the symptoms that targeted passive-aggressive behavior more directly. And furthermore, Milans have proposed 4 subtypes of this passive-aggressive behavior, or the negativist, in its wider definition. And these 4 subtypes are summed up in this table, and as you can see, there are many overlaps with other personality disorders, such as with the borderline, with the fascinating subtype. The psychosis subtype have overlaps with dependent personality disorders, and so on. So the idea behind all this is that we can already notice that this vanishing trouble was more likely to be a dimension than a real distinctive or individualized disorder. And this dimension is still found in many other personality disorders, as mentioned in the table, like in borderline or independent personality disorder. So the second personality disorder I will talk about is the codependent one. So to cite Terry Keller, he said that codependency is not about a relationship with an addict, but it is the absence of relationship with self. It is a dysfunctional happen relationship where one person supports or enables another person's drug addiction, alcoholism, gambling addiction, poor mental health, immaturity, irresponsibility, or underachievement. So it is about an excessive reliance on other people for approval and a sense of identity. So in its broadest definition, a codependent person is someone who cannot function with their innate self, and whose thinking and behavior is organized around another person, or even a process or a substance. And starting from this, these people who are addicted to a substance like drugs or a process like sex, for example, can be considered as codependent. So historically, the concept came directly from the Alcoholics Anonymous, part of the realization that the problem was not solely the addict, but also the family and the friends who constitute the network of the alcoholic. And codependency does not refer to all caring behavior, but only to those that are excessive to an unhealthy degree. And you will see that the difference is very subtle. So this is a table, for example, to sum up or to emphasize the differences between the healthy empathy and the codependency. The healthy empathy is a conscious choice, while codependency actually is a compulsive behavior. And the responsibility to self in healthy empathy is preserved, but it is totally absent for codependent people. And the responsibility for relationships with others is balanced when we have healthy empathy, but we are talking about over-responsibility in codependency. So here, again, the characteristic of codependency. So essentially the caretaking, excessive caretaking, the denial, the disconnected self. There are people who have sex problems in general, relationship problems, they are dependent. And 4 criteria that we have to focus on are the absence of self-relation, the dependence on others, the compulsive helping, and the need of people pleasing all the time. So, Sermark proposes the codependency to be listed as a personality disorder in the 3rd edition of DSM, in its reviewed edition in 1987. So he reasoned that when a specific personality trait becomes an excessive or maladaptive and cause significant impairment in functioning, it warrants a personality disorder diagnosis. But many scholars believe that codependency actually is not a negative trait. It does not need to be treated. It is simply a healthy personality trait, but taken to excess. And Katz states that codependency is overdiagnosed and that many people who could be helped with shorter-term treatments instead become dependent to a long-term self-help programs. So the language of symptoms of and treatment for codependency derive from the medical model suggesting a disease process that underlies this behavior. However, there is no evidence that codependency is caused by a disease process, and that's why it was not improved in the DSM.
The third and final personality disorder I will be talking about is sadistic personality disorder. So sadism involves gaining pleasure from seeing others undergo discomfort and pain. So these individuals generally tend to display recurrent aggression and cruel behavior. It can also include the use of emotional cruelty, purposely manipulating others through the use of fear and the preoccupation with violence. So it has been found to occur frequently, in relation with many other personality disorders. So studies have found that this personality disorder, in fact, is the one with the highest level of comorbidity with other psychological disorders. It is also very, very often associated to alcoholism. And researchers have had many difficulties to distinguish sadistic personality disorders with other forms of personality disorders. And here is the reason why it has been removed from the DSM also. So, many theorists introduced sadistic personality disorder to the DSM in 1987, and it was placed in its third edition to facilitate further systematic clinical study and research. It was proposed to be included, actually, because adults who possessed sadistic personality traits were not labeled, even though their victims were labeled with a self-defeating personality disorder. And Miron wanted to generate further study on it, and he proposed it for the DSM-4, for the work group, but this group actually rejected it. Why? Again, because there is a renewed interest today in studying the personality trait, not the personality disorder itself. In fact, sadism joins other types of personality traits like psychopathy, narcissism, and Machiavellism to form the so-called dark portrait of personality. So everything of this presentation was to lead for this final slide, which is the aim of it. It is the trait theory, or so-called dispositional trait theory. It is known in psychology as an approach to study the human personality, and the trait theorists are primarily interested in measurement of traits, which can be defined as habitual patterns of behavior, thought, and emotion. And according to this perspective, traits are relatively stable over the time, but they differ across individuals. And traits are in contrast to states that are more transitory dispositions. In some systems, traits are something a person either has or has not, but in many other systems, traits are dimensions, with each person rating somewhere along the spectrum, so such as extraversion versus introversion. As a conclusion, I would say that seeing the evolution of different personality disorders through successive editions of the DSM, it is likely that all known and established personality disorders will soon be considered uniquely as traits or dimensions, each of which participate with some degree to constitute a greater and much more complex whole, which is the personality of the human personality. This concept or theory can also be extended to all psychiatric disorders. And thank you for your attention.
Open the floor for discussion for 5 minutes, followed by 15 minutes break. So, any questions? 5 minutes of questions, followed by 15 minutes break. So, any questions?
Very stimulating topics. I have two questions. One is for Dr. Rafi and the other one is for Dr. Zgair. For Dr. Rafi, I want to ask you if there is any studies about immigrant child and adopted child for cultural inherited, not only by language, but maybe in genetic or something. I don't know if there is anything. And for Dr. Zgair, I have the question is there any continuum between baby temperament and the adult temperament? Because I didn't find anything that is really consistent in the subject.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity to continue the diapositive because it was too long.
very nice question about how genetics and culture are overweighing on the personality. There are studies about immigrants, and when they come, for example, from Japan, a collectivistic culture, and they go to Canada, so where there's another problem. They children of second generation can their traits can change, and if we individualistic cultures, they are more open-minded to others. Children from Japan adopt the traits of the new country, and the traits will change with the effect of environment, of culture, of going to school, of contact with peers, and these parts of personality, the traits, can change. Effectively, it can change. I don't know about temperament. Is temperament going to be really, really same? Perhaps on one generation. I make the hypothesis that afterwards, in the effect of time on many generations, something that is really inherited, that is biological, that is related to serotonin, to dopamine, to adrenaline, can change because in the new ecological context, it's if you see that thousands years ago, hunting communities, then agricultural communities, something has changed. It was good to be aggressive, to be aware about others, huh? But in agricultural communities, it's good to be of another temperament. So I think even genetically characteristics can change over many generations. Dr. Steele.
It's stable. It's stable. And I demoted a study which began in 1913 that showed that temperament is stable on 27 years because it's genetically determined. So it's stable for life.
Temperament is not the personality.
Any other questions? Any questions?
I liked the last communications about what's coming in the future.
Yes.
So I agree that all these categories are going to disappear.
Disappear, yes, exactly.
And
That's the tendency, actually, and it will be confirmed in the next edition, I think, of the DSM.
and everything would be traits
Yes,
and
yes,
dimensions.
yes.
But I think also the boundaries between what is normal and what is pathological is not. What do you think about where is the boundary going to be put?
Yeah.
Everything would be normal in plus or minus or.
No, not really. It would be like a spectrum, and maybe for each trait, we would have like a percentage between 0 and 100%, and each person will have like 20% kindness, 30% aggressiveness, and the summary of all this will constitute the personality. So there is, I think that we will overgo the notion of normal and abnormal. will be much more, how to say, precise, and we will try to define the percentage of every trait in each person. So it will be very personalized, actually. That's the aim of that difference in the DSM.
So I guess it will be more focused about or around the adaptability of the behavior rather than being good or bad.
To the human
Whether
being.
it's adaptive or less adaptive.
Yes, exactly.
So this brings us to the end of the session. We meet again after 15